Hi, this is Josh again from Paradigm. Welcome to a very quick tutorial on how to set up Paradigm in your environment and start running your machine learning pipelines on Kubernetes. Before we jump into the setup, I think it's important to understand what we mean by an ML pipeline and why they become crucial as we develop our ML solutions. An ML pipeline is a means of automating the machine learning process, which typically includes steps such as data gathering, data cleaning, model training, model evaluation, and deployment. This is crucial when taking your machine learning models to production for several reasons. The first is reproducibility. Pipelines ensure that you can schedule and recreate your model whenever necessary, thereby helping maintain consistency and reliability in your projects. They can also automate time-consuming processes and significantly speed up the development process and reduce the chances of human error. Scalability is another important point. Pipelines allow you to handle large amounts of data and many complex workflows, making it easier to scale your projects. They can also help teams to collaborate more effectively by defining clear stages and responsibilities in the machine learning process. That said, let's dive into deploying our first ML pipeline with Paradigm. I will be closely following the instructions in the Quickstart guide provided in the documentation. In this tutorial, we'll be setting up things on AWS. First things first, we need to ensure that we have the necessary prerequisites. Here is a small EC2 instance that I'm using as my environment to run everything. To begin, we need a Kubernetes cluster setup and a kube control to access that cluster. We'll be utilizing Amazon Elastic Kubernetes Service, or EKS for short. AWS provides an excellent guide on how to set up an EKS cluster, which I'll link in the description below. Make sure to follow it and come back here once you've got your cluster up and running. We also require AWS CLI to be installed and configured. Make sure to do that as well. And lastly, we need Docker installed and running in our environment. You can download Docker from their official website. Again, all the links are in the description as well as in our documentation. Let me verify if I have everything here. Great. Now that we have all of our prerequisites out of the way, let's move on to setting up Paradigm. As a best practice, I'd recommend creating a new Python environment with your preferred environment manager. I use Anaconda here, and as you can see, I've activated the environment called Paradigm. Once that's done, we're ready to clone the Paradigm repository from GitHub and follow the steps provided here. Let's do it now. And that's it. You successfully set up Paradigm and ready to run your machine learning pipelines on Kubernetes. Now, let's dive into a basic example pipeline here. So this is my set of scripts and notebooks for this demo. You can also find these under the basic example in the repo. As you can see, we're keeping things very simple for this one. I've only included print statements in the first two files since the goal of this example is just to see if we can chain these scripts and notebooks together in a pipeline that runs on Kubernetes. You can modify this code to feature things like engineering and model trainings, for example. Also, have a look at the P3 script here that deploys a simple fast API service. This can be an API endpoint for your trained model at the end of the pipeline. We're going to test how Paradigm can handle deployment steps like these differently and run them as services on Kubernetes. The other important thing to notice is the requirements.p3 file I have here. Paradigm requires us to provide any dependencies for any of the steps in the pipeline. This file needs to be created only if any additional dependencies are needed to be installed. As for this example, we need to define some for the P3 script. Make sure to name it accordingly, which is requirements dot followed by the name of the file, and we're good to go. Now let's launch Paradigm. We're going to run Paradigm launch command with the names of the files we need in the pipeline. In this case, it is P1, P2, and P3. You can define the AWS region you want the resources to be as well. What this does in the background is basically containerize the code for different steps and upload the images to AWS ECR, which will be our container registry. Right, if everything went smoothly, we should have the 3 images now on ECR. Notice how Paradigm automatically handles everything from writing Docker files to installing dependencies to make these images available here. Now it's time for the last step, which is to deploy the pipeline. Let me copy the command we need for this and explain each parameter. Here, steps specifies all steps, except any step that should be run as a service, such as an API endpoint, so only P1 and P2. Dependencies defines the graph structure or DAG for how the steps should be run. Here, we're stating that step P2 is dependent on P1, or in other words, step P2 should be run after P1. And step P3 is dependent on both P2 and P1. It's important to notice how those symbols are used. Deployment defines a service that should be run at the end of the pipeline, P3 in this case. Deployment port should be defined if the service is exposed via a specific port internally. Name can be any name that you want to give this particular pipeline. And finally, region name is the AWS region that you want to use. That's it, and let's deploy. There you go. You can see how the steps are run and the logs from the steps as well. Notice how after deploying the file P3 as a service, Paradigm automatically retrieved the IP of its load balancer. Let's see if it works. As a side note, Paradigm deploys all services like this with load balancers, which makes them scale very easily. Yes, we can see the API deployed here. Great! I hope you're clear on how to set up and use Paradigm to deploy your ML code as pipelines. Paradigm is very adaptable to what you want to execute in each of the steps as you saw. Feel free to reach out to our team at paradigmai.net if you have any questions or want our help to deploy this infrastructure for your projects. Thank you, and I hope you do great things with Paradigm.